This video is brought to you by Sasquatch Technology. We're a Columbus-based consulting firm focused on improving the speed and efficiency of your software delivery pipeline. We understand how to help you go fast. In addition to this YouTube channel, we also have a blog on our website. Links down below. Today we'll be talking about Intellij and how you can navigate around Intellij in an efficient and effective manner. Now, the first thing that I do personally when I'm using Intellij is I expand these tabs at the top so that there's 99 of them, and that they don't collapse. I personally like to see all the tabs, and that's a setting that you can change in, let's see, settings, tabs. So this is a nice thing in Intellij. You can search through the different settings by clicking up here, and then what it'll do is it'll give you all the different places in the settings that has that word. So here we found it immediately. It took us to editor tabs, which is good. So now I set my tab limit to 99, and let's see. And I unclick this show tabs in single row. And what that will do is allow them to kind of grow downwards. Now the disadvantage of this is that if you open up a bunch of files, it will not clean up your workspace. You'll end up with, maybe 20, 30, 40 tabs up here. But for me, what I do is I just go here and click close all or close, usually it's close others, because I just want to get rid of the other tabs and I want to keep that one thing that I'm working on. When you do have a lot of files open, a lot of times what'll happen is that you're working in place A and then you're interested in place B. Maybe you're going back and forth between a unit test and some classes that you're trying to test in that unit test. So for example, let's look at this main test. So the main test is testing. So this is the JBake project. This isn't actually something that I'm super familiar with from the code base standpoint. I've used it a lot. So we're going to be testing this main class, right? So one of the things we're probably going to want to do while we're working on this test is look at the implementation of main, because we need to make sure that we're covering all our bases and that we've exercised all the code paths inside of it. Okay, so what I did there was I control clicked on main, and what that allows me to do is navigate into the function that's being called there. So again, let's go back. So I'm looking at main, I hold control, it turns it into a little mouse, a little handbar here, and then I left click, and that will take me to the definition that's being used here. The nice part is that because Java is statically typed in this way, it knows which invocation I'm trying to use. If you have an interface, it should prompt you for so this is not always the case. In this case, I'm going to a new method like invocation. But sometimes you might try and control click on something like over here. These are just type definitions. So this is just the baker. If this is an interface, it'll take you to the interface. But you can also do things where you can go to the implementing classes. But for right now, we're just going to go to main. Right? Okay, so that took me to the invocation of main that's being used here. That's super useful. Just holding control and left clicking allows you to navigate to the place that is being called, and the code is going to figure that, the IntelliJ editor is going to figure out exactly where the code is calling it. Okay, so now we're looking at main, and what we want to do is we're going to look around in here a lot. And as users, we've reviewed this class, and now we want to go back to that test file. So there's a couple different ways we can do this. If we know that the file that we've been to is just a recent file that we're interested in, we can go ahead and hit Control E, and that will bring up a list of recently used files. I find this super helpful, something a lot of people don't use. One thing is you can stay on your keyboard here, so you don't have to leave your keyboard, and you can actually start typing. I definitely recommend you try this in just about any IntelliJ dialogue that you get. You can sort of skinny down the answers. They're very good about making things keyboard friendly. So one thing I see people doing a lot when I'm working with them is they'll switch between the keyboard and the mouse. But for the most part with IntelliJ, you should be able to do a workflow where you do primarily keyboard stuff, primarily mouse stuff, and then you go back and forth. But you don't switch very quickly. You tend to do a lot of work in one and then a lot of work in another mode. So we want to go back to the test. So remember, we're in the main class, and we want to go back to the test. So because main test is the one that we just came from, it happens to be on the top. But we could have just done something like type main, and that would have shown us the test, helping to skinny down the list of items that are here. Now, again, you don't have to click this with your mouse. So you can click this with your mouse, but you don't have to. You can just hit enter. Now we're back at the place that we came from, and Intellij remembers that you had your mouse at this cursor location. So it'll take you back there. Another thing that we can do is let's navigate into main again. So Intellij has this really great feature that, again, I think is really overlooked and should be used almost all the time. So we just went into the main method, right? But a lot of times what you're going to do is you're going to go into another method definition. So now I'm going to dive into this parse arguments. Okay, and now I'm interested in this launch options definition, right? Okay, now I've just gone from the main test to main. I went from main to a method call, and then I went from a method call to a class definition. I could use Control E to try and get back, but really where I want to go is instead I want to go back to the place I just came from. So where in the main method I just came from, I want to go back there. And the way that you can do this is you can hit Control Alt left arrow, and that will take you back to the place that you were just at. Now that's also up here if you have the, let's see, the toolbar. So you have to, I don't think you get this by default. So I definitely recommend you turn this on if you're not familiar with Intellij and you want to use the mouse instead of the keyboard. Just go to View and make sure Toolbar is selected, and it'll give you some options here that, and it'll tell you what the hotkeys are if you hover over them. So here we have Update Project as Control T. In this case, the hotkey that we just used was back. Now you can click on the left arrow and use this navigation if you want to, but what it allows you to do is go back and forth through the different places that you've navigated in a stack sort of manner. So here we're at parse arguments. If we go forward, it'll take us into parse arguments. So here we see the launch options. Again, we can go back and we can go back again. If we go back here, then it should take you to main. Yep, so you see we went from main and then we clicked on parse arguments. So Intellij maintains a really smart collection of sort of previous location history in a stack, and you can navigate back and forth in that stack. So Control left arrow, if we do it here, I believe should take us back to main test. Yep, and so now we're back at main test, and this is where we went to main through. Now, one thing you can do is you can go, so we went backwards down the stack, so we sort of have been popping elements, but Intellij doesn't discard those elements. It allows you to go back into them. So if I wanted to retrace my steps, I can do Control Alt right arrow, which is equivalent to clicking on this, and that takes me forward into the stack. So I went into main, and then I went into parse arguments, and then parse arguments took me to launch options. So this backwards arrow, what I find a lot of times when I'm looking at code is that I tend to be like very deep in a function, and then I want to back out one step. Another thing is when you're navigating code, a lot of times there'll be 3 or 4 places that you're interested in the code where you're working on some kind of related functionality, and you need to update like multiple places in the code to make sure that everything is working correctly. Or maybe you find something that's interesting and you want to be able to look at it later. Well, so one thing you can do is you could add like a to-do comment, and Intellij is smart about those. There's actually a setting where you can modify these, what it'll highlight for these to do, and I think there's fix me is another one. Yeah, so there's a setting in the settings somewhere for that. But what you really want to do is have something where it doesn't modify your code, and Intellij provides an option for that called bookmarks. Now, I've always used the hotkey for this, so I'm not even sure if this has a button, but you hit F11 and it adds a bookmark. Now, the nice part about this is that Intellij, you can, if you're still in the same line, you can just hit F11 and you can turn it off and on. If you're on another line, you hit F11, it just adds another bookmark. So these are line-based, and they'll move around with the line as long as you don't delete the entire thing. So, for example, if I put a bunch of spaces here, that F11 will stick to the place in the code that it's at. But if you delete that, you'll delete the bookmark. So we've made a bookmark, and that's great, but how do we get to it? So, later when you want to recall it. So let's put a couple more bookmarks down. It's not very important where we put them at. Let's put them in different files. Okay, so we have like 5 bookmarks I think we added. So we want to navigate to one of those bookmarks, and the way that you do that is you hit Shift F11. And again, sticking with the whole keyboard thing, what do we expect to be able to do here? Well, type stuff. So if I type main, it'll skinny down the selections to just the main class. There's some controls up here, which allow you to do things like edit. You can actually give the bookmarks descriptions so that you get a little bit better. So let's say this is like main output. So it'll put a little note there on the bookmark so that you kind of know conceptually why you put it there. I don't use that feature a lot, but it is available. The main thing that you're doing here, though, is that we hit Shift F11, and you're trying to navigate to a place in your code base. So again, I'm just using the keyboard here, and you can navigate up and down, and then you can click Enter, and it'll snap you to that spot. Now, no matter where you navigated from, you can always get back there, again, by Control-Alt-Left arrow, and that'll take you back to where we're from. And again, you can use the forward Control-Alt-Right arrow to go to the place where the bookmark was at. You can also clean up your bookmarks from here. So a lot of times I'll just get rid of all my bookmarks by hitting delete repeatedly, and then I won't have any bookmarks left. Bookmarks are super helpful. I definitely recommend using them if you're kind of scattered around the code base. Another thing that I like to do is annotate. And this depends on the Git plugin, but everyone should be using Git. And I think this works with other SCMs, but what it lets you do is, let's say you're looking at a file, and I'm looking at this run server code, right? And I want to understand when this was added, like what was that person thinking, right? Like what were they doing? So I can go over here, and by annotating this, so I just right click in this column here, and then I click on annotate. It adds, this is using basically git blame under the hood, and it's gonna give you the same sort of output that you would get from git blame, which is telling you this line of code was written by this person in this commit. So the coloration matches up the commits to each other, and they tend to be a little bit darker, or I think they tend to be a little bit more bold the newer they are. Yeah, so Becker here, he is, I think, the last person that worked on this file because he's got the star. And I believe that's like the current, I wonder if that's the current commit. In any case, Becker is bolded because he is the last guy who delivered to this file. But what I want to see is, what did Megar, like what was going on in this commit? So I can just hover over it, and I can see the description here. Jetty server failed to serve. I'm not sure what this means, and I don't really care for this demonstration. But I can click on it, and I can see the entire commit that went in my IDE around this one change. So I'm not sure exactly what he was trying to fix, but that gives me some idea that this code was okay, and Makar was just fixing a bug. Now we can see Bullock delivered most of the code here in one big commit. So this is probably the original commit that added this this option. So I can open it up. I can see, what sort of changes he made around this area. And nicely too, I can look at the tests that he added, and I can kind of get an idea about what things did he care about testing while he was adding this code. So this annotation can be really helpful a couple different ways. Primarily, it helps you get an understanding about what was going on when the code was changed. It can help you find somebody that can help you with the code. So for example, maybe I was on a team, and I wanted to know about, this part of the code base, this launch options. Then I would probably want to go talk to this Renier person, because it looks like they're the Renier or Roser, because those people have been messing with this area of the code. I could talk to Bullock because he's all over it, but these people might have specialty in that area. Another thing that's really cool is if you have an SCM set up like Git, you can see where your changes are at. So I just hit new line. I just made a new line here. And what it does is it puts a little green arrow here and shows me the change that I've made. So I'm just going to put something here. I'll just put a comment. So what you can do is you can click here and you can see the difference between what you had and what was there. And you can also just revert it real quick if you want to see what it would be like without your changes there. Now I hit Control Z and it just brought it right back. Let's see. This might be more interesting if I had some code that was, over top of, so like, if I change this to parse, let's see, parse argument, blah. Then I could get an idea about how I had changed it. So this is what it used to be, parse arguments args, but now I've changed it to this. So this is just real helpful when you want to get a quick look back at what things were and you don't want to drop down to the command line. Another great simple navigation item is you can open Java classes. So this is generally true for Ruby classes, Java classes, as long as you have the appropriate plugins installed. All these different programming languages have the same concept of class. So if you hit Control N, you get a prompt that says enter class name. Now, if you pay attention here, it'll say include non-project classes. So that could be a really nice way if you want to open up something that's in your dependencies. So for example, I can go down here and look at my external libraries and find a class here, so car sets. So if I type in car sets, so it kind of did it for me. I didn't hit Control N, but because there are no matches in the normal library, it went ahead and searched the, so see how I've typed CHA. So that has a match in my library, okay? So I don't have to hit, but if I want to expand this, so let's say it had a bunch of hits, but I want to expand it and see the dependencies as well, I could hit Control N now, and that would add all the dependencies. So these things that are highlighted in yellow, it'll show you where they're coming from, and it'll give you the class that it's going to open. And these things tend to be, they have these little ... if you want to get more data pulled into the auto select. But really the way to make this better is not to try and paginate, which is what this is doing. You want to just add more data so you can skinny down the list. So that's looking at non-project classes. Again, I can hit Control N to turn that off. And now the reason it still shows chained is because chained doesn't match anything in the current real project. So IntelliJ is basically saying, once I can't find anything in the normal project, start looking at the dependencies. So, and then we can go back to this. One cool thing you can do too here is that if you know the name and you're using camel case, then you can do something like this. So what I've done here is I've just typed the uppercase versions, or do you even have to do uppercase? CFS. Yeah, so what I've done here is I've just typed the first letters of the camel case definition of the class, and it's able to bind to that. So here we could have just done CCL and gone directly to it. So I find that really helpful. What else? So that's opening classes. The other thing you want to open a lot of times is files. So files, very similar. Instead of hitting Control N, which brings up classes, you want to hit Control Shift N, and that'll bring up files. Now you have to be a little careful here. So files will not look for anything in excluded directories, which is good. So IntelliJ is smart enough to, what it does is it knows that, so see this cancel exclusion, that means this directory is already excluded. So when you do Control-Shift-N to open up a file, and the same thing goes for classes, anything that's in one of these excluded directories, it will not try and search there, which is helpful a lot of times, like in a JavaScript project, you tend to maintain the same file names in your distributed code as you do in your your source code. Like something will be called like component.js in your source code, and then when it goes through your build process, it'll still be called the same thing. And if you don't have your exclusions correct, then you'll actually see you'll see double here in this window. So um, in this case, IntelliJ understands the Gradle build process for Java, and it's already giving me an exclusion. But you may need to manually exclude some things if you're doing a JavaScript file or if you have a weird build process. So in this case, let's just open the .travis.yaml file. Now that's just in the base directory. So we're going to open it up, and you can see it's right here. One of the cool parts I find is this is more useful in really complicated projects. So here we have this random dist folder, and you can see it has logging. You know, it's kind of following the Java packaging, but it's not a Java package. There's no Java classes in here. And this would probably be in some kind of resource folder. This doesn't look like it's kind of set up right, but that's okay. It's not my project. So if we want to get at logback.xml, we can do logback.xml. Now, one of the things you can see immediately here, this is exactly the kind of thing that I would expect. So they have a test resources that also has a logback.xml. Now, really, this should be called logback-test because logback binds to logback.test preferentially over logback. So this project just isn't set up that great. But because I'm getting two of them, sometimes if you open up a logback.xml file in a project, you'll get like hundreds. So what you can do is you can actually prefix this with the directory that you expect it to be in and get access to it that way. So I could say, like if I'm interested in the logging, let's say I have a project called logging or something like that, or with a project with a logging module, then I would go to logback, or I would do logging, and then this slash here. This slash is the special part. That's what allows it to use this directory structure. And you can do this, I can put lib in front of it. This is really great because if you do a build from the command line, you can grab those long paths and just kind of paste them in here. So one more big navigation thing that I find helpful is if I'm looking at a class, let's see if there's any interfaces. Great. Okay, so I just hit Control-Shift-F, and that brought up Find in Path. I don't know what IntelliJ has done, but it has gotten super fast in the last major version they put out. So this used to be something that I would kind of go to not as a last resort, but kind of as like a middling resort because it was a little slow. But it's pretty fast right now. So what I was doing was just looking for an interface, some class that was an interface in Java. And the reason that I wanted to do that was because I wanted to be able to show you there's a way you can say, given that I'm looking at the keys, I want to see all the implementations. So if I control click on it, what it shows me is all the usages, which is not bad, but that's not really what I want. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Alt Control B, and it's going to show me the implementations. Now this one's saying there's no implementations here, which can have a couple different reasons. In this case, there's no implementation because this interface is just being used as a collection of strings. So this interface is never designed to be extended. So that was the correct result in the sense that, yeah, there was no interface, but let's try and find one. Okay, this should be one that has a couple different implementations. So if we hit Control-Alt, so let's hit Control. Yeah, so again, this just shows me usages. But really what I want is Control-Alt-B will show me all the different implementations. So this is the only other implementation. This is an anonymous implementation, which is something cool that you can do in Java, but it doesn't have like a... You would not have found this by searching for interface or implements interface template model. So we search for that, we won't find anything. And the reason, and so that's one of the big things about IntelliJ is when you're using their search features, you're actually searching the language. You're searching Java or Groovy or whatever. you're searching its understanding of the class hierarchy and all the different constructs that you have, but in a sense that it understands what the language is doing. It's not just searching text. So when we look for implementation, it doesn't just look for stuff where you see implements and then the interface name. It's also finding, I mean, it actually finds two cool ones here. One is this inner class, which is like a sort of default implementation they packaged up with the interface, and it also finds that one that's an anonymous class. So that Control Alt B, that is sort of the hotkey. But one cool part about Intellij is that it tends to decorate this left bar here with important little icons that if you're not really familiar with them, then you may totally ignore them, and I've done that a million times. These icons can come from plugins. So if you add the Spring plugin, then you'll get little leaves, and that'll tell you, like, for example, you can have something where you're injecting implementations into a class, and IntelliJ will let you know which bean you're referencing inside your class. It's actually quite clever. So in this case, what this is telling us is that this interface is implemented by. So this is a down arrow. So this is saying it's talking about classes that belong that are sort of one step below in the type hierarchy. So this gives us the same result as hitting Control Alt B. I just like to stay on the keyboard if possible. Now this guy, he's an implementation of template engine, right? So when you look at this no op adapter, it'll allow you to see which interface each method comes from. So if this thing implemented, let's say this thing implements comparable string, I don't know. So I just added another implementation. So the cool part is this thing actually implements two interfaces, and you can say, take me to the interface that this method belongs to. And you just control click here. And so this is a little strange because we're in the same class file, but it would snap you to, it would take you to a new class file if there were one. In this case, it's taking you to the adapt method on the interface. So here we are on the adapt method in the implementation, and this up arrow means take me, this is going to give you information about the thing that is one up in the class hierarchy, which is the interface. Now, if we look at compare to comes from comparable. So if we control click on that, so here it actually snaps you to this interface that's in the Java standard library. You know, it's got all the long-winded information in it, or Java docs which is in it. And then how do we get back? We hit Control Alt left arrow, and that takes us back to where we were at. This is Michael Pinniger for Sasquatch Technology, and I'd like to thank you for watching. That's it for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below if you have feedback or ideas about other videos you'd like to see in the future.